That's more than you deserve. Daddy, please come home.
Was not born unwanted, only born where love could not find me. People often say destiny arrives softly, like morning light slipping under a curtain. Mine came with rain, angry, heavy, mourning something I had not yet lived long enough to lose. I was told I was only a few hours old when Richard Lancaster, billionaire empire builder, and the man who would become the only true father I ever knew, walked into the adoption center and saw me that I do not remember the moment. But I have lived my entire life feeling its echo. He once confessed that when he first held me, I did not cry as newborns usually do. No wailing. No trembling. I simply stared up at him. Seraphina, he named me, pressing his cheek to my forehead. A child of fire and angels. Sometimes I wonder if he saved me, or if I saved him. My earliest memory of Evelyn Lancaster, my adoptive mother, is her perfume. The kind of scent that feels expensive but never warm. She tolerated me during the early years, mostly because she believed she would never have a biological child. I was her pity project, her husband's joy, the accessory that completed their perfect American family portrait. But the day she finally gave birth, twins no less, her love for me died with the speed of a flame kissed by wind. I remember standing beside her hospital bed, 5 years old, wearing a pink dress Richard bought me from Paris. "Mommy," I whispered, reaching for her hand. She snatched it away as if touched by something unclean. "Don't come too close," she said. "You'll wake them. Her real children." That's when I realized that blood can fill veins, and still run colder than winter. My father, Richard, compensated for her void with a kind of love that felt too big for the world we lived in. He took me everywhere. Business trips, charity events, rooftop restaurants where city lights danced like constellations, midnight drives where he taught me the names of stars and whispered, "You shine brighter than all of them, Seraph." But when he left for business, as he often did, his love traveled with him. And I was left alone in a mansion where every chandelier sparkled, yet every room felt cold. The twins, Aiden and Isabella, were beautiful, adored, and taught from birth that they were the royalty of our home. And I was the ghost child, the reminder of a promise made before they arrived. Evelyn's subtle cruelty became household law. The twins copied her like scripture. Aiden learned early how to glare at me with entitlement. Isabella learned how to ignore me like dust. Children imitate what they see. And what they saw was their mother's disdain dripping off her every glance at me. The strange part? I still loved them. Or maybe I loved the idea of having siblings to share life with. But they were hers. And I was simply present. There is one memory that is carved into me so deeply I can still smell the hallway carpet. I had reached to hand baby Isabella her toy. Evelyn slapped my hand away, her eyes sharp as knives. "Don't touch her. You're not part of this. Not part of this." That was the day I realized I lived in a home, but not in a family. Whenever the mansion doors swung open and my father stepped through with tired eyes and a weary smile, I burst alive again. "Seraph," he'd call, sweeping me into his arms. "My little star. Tell me everything I missed." Everything. Because he was the one person who made me feel like I wasn't merely breathing. I was living. When he was home, I laughed. When he left, I folded into myself. I never told him how the house swallowed me whole when he wasn't there. He had empires to run. Deals both clean and stained with shadows. Things he believed would protect us. Things he never wanted me to understand. I wish he had lived long enough to know I understood everything. If I had known that the warmth I clung to was fragile, that one day he would be taken from me in a burst of fire and twisted metal, maybe I would have held him tighter. Maybe I would have said, "Don't go." But the past, like some cruel god, does not bargain. This chapter of my life ended with the death of the only man who ever loved me without condition. And it was only the beginning of the darkest years of my existence. If you ever wish to understand loneliness, don't look for it in empty places. Look for it in a house full of people who pretend you're not there. Growing up in the Lancaster mansion was like living inside a beautiful lie. Every chandelier sparkled with warmth I was never allowed to touch. Every staircase was polished so perfectly it reflected back a version of me that looked present, but invisible. The mansion was luxury, but I was not. I was simply a guest who never left. Evelyn Lancaster, my adoptive mother, had perfected the art of silent punishment. She rarely yelled. She didn't need to. A glance from her could freeze oceans. A sigh could shatter entire days. A lifted chin meant I no longer existed to her. I often wondered when she decided I was the intruder in her perfect world. Maybe it was the moment she birthed her twins and felt something wild and primal. A mother's claim over the children that belonged to her. And I belonged to no one. Not in her eyes. Aiden and Isabella were born with everything I lacked. Their mother's affection, their father's name, and the certainty that the world revolved around them. As toddlers they adored me. As children they tolerated me. As they grew older they sharpened themselves on Evelyn's resentment. Children are mirrors. They reflect what is shown to them. So they reflected hatred. Aiden would bump into me deliberately, then smirk as if daring me to react. Isabella would hide my things and pretend she had never seen them. They made games out of erasing me. One day I walked into the living room and heard them whispering. "Why is she even still here?" Isabella asked. "She's not one of us." Mom said Dad felt sorry for her. Aiden added. "That's all she is. A pity child." Pity child. I carried that name like a weight under my ribs. When my father was home the house changed shape. Walls that once felt cold became warm. Rooms that swallowed me whole suddenly felt alive. The entire mansion inhaled when he walked through the door. And so did I. He would hug me first, always first, and say, "There she is. My Seraphina. My reason to come home." I believed him every time. He let me sit in his study while he worked, allowed me to steal bites from his dessert, took me to parks when I felt suffocated, and taught me things no one else cared to teach me. How to spot a lie from the eyes. How to listen to silence. How to survive a world that never wanted you. Without trying, he was everything to me. Father, shelter, anchor. But he was rarely home. His business empire stretched across states and oceans. Some of those businesses, I would later learn, were soaked in shadows he tried to keep far from us. So when he left, the mansion collapsed back into its true form. A kingdom where I was no one. The house had mirrors everywhere. In hallways, in bedrooms, in staircases. Whenever I passed one, I forced myself to look. Not because I cared for my reflection, but because I needed to remind myself I was real. That I existed in a place where everyone worked tirelessly to erase me. "I love," my father once said, brushing my hair from my face. "You are worth more than all their cruelty." But it is hard to feel valuable when every door you open leads to a room where love is rationed like oxygen. And I was always the last chosen to breathe. Pain is a strange teacher. Teaches you to see beyond the surface of people. To hear what they don't say. To read the emotions they bury. To understand the difference between those who love you and those who love what you give them. A house of mirrors will not show you who you are. It will only show you who they want you to be. And in that mansion I learned early who I wasn't. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their equal. I wasn't welcome. But I was alive. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough to keep going. Because every time my father returned, he looked at me and saw not an outsider, but a child worth loving. I held on to that. I held on to him. Even though I didn't know the day would come when he wouldn't return at all. They say life sometimes leaves you without warning. And they are right. But no one ever warns you how it feels when the one person you trust most is torn away in fire and smoke. It was early morning. The kind of morning where the sun slices the sky with golden blades and everything seems untouched, pristine, safe. I was brushing my hair when the call came. A stranger's voice, cold, clipped. "Miss Lancaster? There's been an accident. A car explosion. Your father, he didn't survive." The room fell away. The floor melted beneath me. The walls of the mansion, the only walls that ever protected me, seemed to close in. "Wrong," I whispered aloud. "Wrong, wrong, wrong." But it was not wrong. It was reality. And reality had teeth. Richard Lancaster had been my anchor. My protector. My single source of warmth in a mansion that otherwise knew only cold. He had taught me to breathe when the house tried to suffocate me. He had taught me to speak when silence was safer. He had taught me to laugh when cruelty waited at every corner. And now he was gone. Taken in a flash of fire and metal. A message left by someone who hated him enough to ensure I would feel the aftermath. I did not cry immediately. I could not. I walked numb through the halls, touching the walls as if they might answer questions I couldn't ask. No one spoke. No one comforted me. I was alone. Completely achingly alone. Rumors spread fast. Accident, some said. Sabotage, whispered others. I didn't care about the reason. I only knew the effect. The mansion, once a castle of my father's protection, was now a labyrinth of threat. The walls had teeth. The mirrors had eyes. Even the silence whispered his absence. I slept that night on my father's chair in his study. The leather smelled of him, cologne, old paper, cigar smoke. I traced the edges with trembling fingers, hoping to feel his presence one last time. But he was gone. And in that void the house no longer felt like home. Felt like a trap. And I was the only one left inside it. Without him everything grew sharper. Aiden's glances became more dangerous. Evelyn's cruelty, now unchecked, bloomed. Even Isabella's laughter became a weapon aimed at me. I realized painfully that my father's protection had been the only thing standing between me and complete despair. And now, that shield was gone. But I survived. I always survived. Because if there was one thing my father had taught me, it was how to endure. And endure I would. Even if the endurance tasted like ash. Some truths arrive not softly, but like thunder splitting the sky, leaving you exposed, trembling, and powerless. That day I learned that blood does not guarantee mercy. And love can be dictated by contracts. It was early afternoon when the lawyer arrived. His black briefcase seemed heavier than it had any right to be. I knew before he spoke that it carried more than words. It carried destiny. "Miss Lancaster," he said, bowing slightly, "I am here to read the last will and testament of Richard Lancaster." I swallowed. My father, dead. And now, even in death, he was orchestrating the lives of those he loved. The will was precise. Isabella Lancaster, my biological sister, was to marry a powerful Mafia lord. I, the adopted child, was to marry a royal prince from one of the most influential dynasties in the world. Shock did not even begin to describe it. I should have felt elation. I should have felt pride. That I felt fear. Because in that house, nothing good came without cost. Evelyn, my mother in name only, went pale, then red, then violet, her anger blooming like a storm in a perfect vase. "How dare he?" she hissed. Her eyes, always sharp, now glimmered with something darker than disdain. "He dares to give her the royal family. And my daughter, to the Mafia?" Her voice cracked with fury. Her hands trembled, not with fear but with greed and rage. It became clear. Nothing mattered to her more than control. Nothing mattered more than appearances. And certainly nothing mattered more than her ego. "Seraphina," she said, her tone now icy venom-laced. "You will switch. You will marry the Mafia lord's son. And Isabella will take your place with the royal family. Do this or you will be erased from this family entirely." I had no words. I wanted to scream, to collapse, to run. But the mansion had long ago taught me that survival meant obedience. I nodded, stiffly. "Yes, mother," I whispered. Not out of fear, but out of love for my father. Because honoring my father's memory meant keeping the family intact. Even if it meant sacrificing my own happiness. The next day the contracts were drawn and signed. My signature, faint but deliberate. Isabella's, smug and unaware of the truth behind her rise. I shook hands with the royal family's representative, felt the weight of a crown I did not desire press upon my future. I looked into the Mafia lord's eyes when he shook mine, and wondered if I had just sold my soul to survive. The house had shifted. Power had been redistributed. And I had learned the bitter lesson of compromise. Sometimes love for one man, my father, meant enduring a world that would never love me. They tell you that love cannot be commanded, that it cannot be summoned with signatures or contracts. They are wrong. Because the moment I met Elias Thorne, I felt a current I could not name, an invisible thread tying my fate to his. It was a crisp spring afternoon when I first saw him, the kind of day that makes the city sparkle, but I barely noticed the sunlight, because my attention had been claimed entirely by him. He stood across the room, leaning slightly against a polished oak table, hands folded as though holding a secret he could never speak aloud. The world might have labeled him ordinary, a shy accountant, quiet, reserved. But I knew better in that first glance. His eyes carried shadows and fire alike, and a weight that made him seem older than his years, wiser than any man I had ever met. I remember the way his gaze found me across the crowded room. Not intrusive, not demanding, but persistent, curious, patient. It startled me. A silent magnetism tugged at my chest, as though the air itself had folded us together. Before either of us had spoken a word, I stepped closer cautiously. He did not flinch. His faint smile was a question and a promise all at once. And I knew, without understanding how, that my life had changed. "Seraphina Lancaster," he said, his voice low but clear. "So this is the woman I am to share a future with." I tilted my head, heart racing. Not with fear, but with an excitement I hadn't allowed myself in years. "You will have to forgive me," I said softly. "If I seem wary. This is a contract after all, not a courtship." He chuckled, a sound like quiet thunder. "I'm aware," he said, "but some contracts find ways of rewriting themselves." I froze, startled by the weight behind his words. There was a promise in them. Not the shallow promise of business, but the promise of something deeper. We stood there, eyes locked, and for one brief heartbeat, the world around us vanished. I could not explain it. I could not rationalize it. All I knew was that this man, this quiet, unassuming man, had reached past the layers of obligation, of duty, of pain, that I had built around myself. And in that moment I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Hope. A fragile, trembling, terrifying hope. Contracts are cold things. They have no warmth, no pulse, no whisper of affection. And yet when I moved into the residence with Elias Thorne, I discovered that even the coldest agreements can carry sparks. The first night we shared a room was unbearable. The bed was too big, the air too heavy. Every movement, every breath felt like trespassing on territory I was not allowed to claim. I turned to my side, pulling the blankets tight, hoping to make myself as small as possible. He sat stiffly at the edge of the bed, hands folded, eyes staring at some point on the wall, as if he were trying to memorize the contours of our shared space without crossing an invisible line. We spoke very little, not because we had nothing to say, but because saying anything felt dangerous, because every word could reveal a part of ourselves. We were not yet willing to surrender. Over days, trust crept into the corners of our interactions, quiet as dawn. A shared cup of coffee in the morning, a gentle correction of mispronounced words, an offer of a sweater when the winter wind bit through the window. Small gestures, tiny sparks, each one a brick laid in the walls of intimacy. I began to notice him, the way he carefully avoided stepping on my shadows, the way his gaze softened when he thought I wasn't looking, the faint tremor in his hand when he reached for mine and hesitated. And I, who had spent years surviving, in a house that taught me fear, found myself wanting. It came one night when neither of us had planned it. We had been talking quietly late into the night, about books, about childhood, about the rare, fleeting moments of joy in our lives. His hand brushed mine, not intentionally, he claimed, but the electricity that ran through my fingers said otherwise. "I've never done this," he whispered, and before I could answer, he leaned closer. The kiss was soft, hesitant, unpracticed. No passion, no fire, just the trembling acknowledgement of two people who had been alone for far too long. I closed my eyes and let it happen. For a moment, the world narrowed to the warmth of his lips, the steady pulse beneath his hand, the quiet promise that maybe we could trust each other. After the kiss, we did not speak of contracts, obligations, or alliances. We spoke of fear, of loss, of longing. For the first time I felt seen. Not as the adopted daughter, not as a contract bride, not as a pawn in someone else's game. Just as me, Seraphina. And when Elias rested his head on my shoulder that night, allowing himself to lean into something he had always denied himself, I realized that intimacy is not only physical. It is trust. It is vulnerability. It is choosing to exist in the same space, to share not just a bed but pieces of your soul. And in that moment, I knew our lives had already begun to intertwine. Some days life demands courage you didn't know you had. And some nights, it teaches you that love is forged in the heat of fear. He had been gone for 2 days, just a short business trip, or so he said. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you imagine things. But I never imagined this. I woke that morning to a streak of crimson across the marble floor. My heart skipped. Every instinct screamed. I followed the trail, breath catching in my chest. There he was, Elias, bleeding, pale but still breathing. His shirt was torn, blood soaked his side, and yet there was no panic in his eyes. Just a faint, quiet acknowledgement of what had happened. I didn't hesitate. I checked online tutorials for first aid as my hands trembled. I pressed, bandaged, cleaned, whispered reassurances I barely believed myself. "Stay with me," I begged. "Please stay with me." He insisted he was fine. He wouldn't go to the hospital. But I refused to leave him alone. And then exhaustion, fear, and relief combined into a strange lull. He collapsed, not fully but partially, onto my lap, head resting against me for the first time ever. I had never felt anyone so unguarded, so unashamed of their reliance, and yet so terrifyingly strong. His eyes fluttered closed, chest rising and falling, and I held him there, realizing something profound. He trusted me completely, and I had never been trusted like this before. It was a moment of intimacy I had not anticipated. No contracts, no obligations, no expectations, only vulnerability. And in that silence, in that fragile heartbeat of trust, our connection deepened. Something unspoken passed between us. Something irreversible. When he finally moved enough to sit up, there was a new energy between us, a quiet acknowledgement that we were no longer strangers. I had saved him. He had allowed himself to depend on me. The boundaries of contract, of obligation, of duty, blurred that day. It was no longer just a legal arrangement. It was life entwined with life. Danger and trust had forged a new understanding between us. And I realized for the first time in my life, that love can grow from chaos, that intimacy can bloom from fear, and that the heart is capable of choosing who to cling to. Even in a world that demands distance, some stories are not ours to live, yet we witness them as if standing too close to a storm. This is Isabella's story, and I watched it unfold with a mixture of dread and reluctant awe. Isabella had always been the golden child, born into privilege, adored by Evelyn, untouched by consequence, until she walked into the world of the Mafia lord. The man she was forced to marry could have been a monster on paper. Ruthless, powerful, unyielding, yet to my surprise he was patient, kind in ways she had never experienced. He did not bow to her status. He did not flaunt his power to intimidate her. Instead he listened, he guided, he protected, and slowly Isabella began to change. She wrote to me once, though her letters were rare and hesitant. "Seraphina, I never thought kindness could feel like this. I feel alive here. I am learning how to stand on my own. I am grateful." Reading her words, I felt something unfamiliar, relief. For years I had feared she would grow crueler, sharper, more dangerous, mirroring Evelyn's own bitterness. But in the arms of her new life, she softened. Her laughter, once forced, now carried warmth. Her gaze, once cold, now occasionally held reflection. It was remarkable. The girl who had learned cruelty from her mother was learning empathy from her husband. I watched her grow without realizing it fully until one evening. He called me, voice trembling. "Seraphina, he trusts me. Really trusts me." I never knew that was possible. And I thought, this is what love looks like when it is given freely, not taken, not earned through fear, but simply allowed to exist. Her growth reminded me that even those born with all advantages can learn humility. Even those raised with entitlement can discover compassion. Seeing Isabella transform did not make me envious. It reminded me that life can shape people in ways we cannot control. It reminded me that even in our Father's absence, the world would continue to test us. And that strength can grow in unexpected places, even in the one person who had made my life a living labyrinth of pain. And as her letters arrived, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, I realized that while our fates had diverged, our hearts were still tethered by the invisible thread of family. Even if it was frayed, even if it was tested beyond recognition. Some treasures hide in plain sight. Some fortunes sit beneath the very noses of those who would never suspect. And sometimes, it takes a lifetime to notice the simplest of patterns. For years I had watched Evelyn move through her daily rituals. Coffee at 7, a brisk walk, a meticulous breakfast. And then, the paper. Every day. 5 years. Without fail. She would sign it, glance at it, and set it aside. I had never questioned it. After all, Evelyn was the matriarch. Everything she did seemed purposeful. And yet my curiosity, long buried beneath fear and obedience, finally stirred. Why this paper? What power did it hold that she never spoke of, never flaunted, never admitted? I began tracing the markings. Comparing dates, signatures, small notations. Something glimmered in the margins. A subtle code, a key hidden in plain sight. I researched tirelessly, nights blending into mornings. And then the truth hit me like a thunderclap. This paper was tied to my father's secret inheritance. Not a small fortune. Not just wealth enough to live comfortably. Billions. Enough to feed generations, to build empires, to reshape destinies. And all this time, Evelyn had been holding it, signing it, maintaining control. I sat down with the papers spread across the floor. Heart hammering, mind racing. 5 years. 5 years she had unknowingly, or knowingly, acknowledged the lifeblood of my father's empire. 5 years she had carried the power to erase or secure our future. No. I held the key. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and deeply, irrevocably mine. I poured a glass of wine and held the paper close, feeling a surge of pride I had never allowed myself. For the first time I realized, I was not merely the adopted daughter. I was the inheritor of legacy, of vision, of wealth my father had fought to create. And unlike Evelyn, I would honor it. Unlike Evelyn, I would not let it become a tool of vanity or control. I would use it to protect, to empower, to build. The first step toward reclaiming everything that had ever been taken from me, had begun with a single sheet of paper. Not every enemy stands at your gates. Some sleep in your father's chair. Elias had always carried silence like armor. He spoke little, observed everything, and moved like a man whose shadows had shadows of their own. But after the night I found him bleeding, after I washed the blood of strangers from his skin, something shifted within him. He began watching the house, watching the people, watching the past, and especially, watching my uncle, Marcus Lancaster, the man who smiled too easily, the man who hugged too tightly, the man whose eyes never warmed even when his lips did. It started with a file, then a name, then a photograph, And then Elias disappeared for 2 days. When he returned, he looked altered. A man carved sharper by the truth. A man carrying knowledge heavy enough to wound. He shut the door, placed his hands on the table and whispered, "Seraphina, your uncle killed your father." My breath fled my lungs. The room spun. The world tilted. But Elias did not stop. He couldn't. The truth was a flood and it had already breached the dam. Marcus. In my father's house. Sleeping in my father's bed. With my father's wife. The mother who never saw me as hers. The woman whose hatred raised me more faithfully than her love ever did. Elias found proof. Receipts. Messages. Photographs. A secret affair that began long before I could walk. A forbidden bond that survived marriage, children, and even death. A betrayal that grew like rot beneath the floors of our home. But the affair was only the beginning. The darkest truth was still unfolding. Marcus Lancaster was no failed businessman. No grieving brother. No supportive uncle. He was a ghost. Phantom. A professional killer hidden in plain sight. The hitman every mafia lord whispered about but never named. The shadow who never left fingerprints. The blade that never missed. The man my father trusted. The man who drove beside him the night the car exploded. Elias looked into my eyes when he said it. Your father never stood a chance. Once I stopped shaking. Once my heartbeat slowed from thunder to tremor. I asked the only question that mattered. Is he done killing? Elias closed his eyes. Pain flickered across his face like lightning. No, Seraphina. You are next. My soul froze. The air around me thickened. Every memory of Marcus's lingering looks, his quiet questions, his sudden visits. They all rearranged themselves into a new horrifying picture. Elias explained the rest in a low voice. Because I held the inheritance key. Because I stood in the way of billions. Because I was the last thread my father left behind. And Marcus wanted the tapestry torn clean. I didn't cry. Not this time. I simply whispered. Why would you tell me this? Elias stepped closer, gently cupping my face. His thumb brushed the corner of my lip. His voice was raw, honest, unguarded. Because I will not let him take you from me. For the first time in my life, someone's promise felt like home. Not blood. Not wealth. Not legacy. Just this man. This quiet, wounded man who chose me in a world full of war. The night holds truths the daylight fears to speak. He didn't tell me where he was going. He only pressed a soft kiss to my forehead. The kind a man gives when he's not sure he'll return. And whispered. Sleep. I'll bring you answers. But I didn't sleep. My soul paced the floor with every second that passed without him. The silence felt heavier than walls. And the night tasted like forewarning. Elias was hunting a serpent. A serpent who had learned to shed his skin and leave no trace. A serpent who shared my bloodline. Took him hours, maybe longer, to find it. The place my uncle used as his second life. A warehouse forgotten by the world. An address not listed on papers. And not meant for human eyes. Elias said later it felt like walking into the heartbeat of danger. The building was silent. Dust settled like ash. And everything smelled faintly of iron. Of blood long cleaned but never truly gone. He moved quietly, his breath low. His steps calculated like a man raised by shadows. Then he found it. A small locked drawer hidden behind a false wall. Elias cracked it open with steady fingers. Inside lay the truth. A smooth black mask. Cold, emotionless, terrifying in its simplicity. The mask the Mafia whispered about. The mask of the hitman who left no witnesses. Marcus Lancaster. My uncle. My father's murderer. Elias lifted it gently as if it might scream. He photographed everything. And then kept searching. Behind another panel he found a recorder. Old, black, heavy with secrets. He pressed play. My father's voice filled the room. Soft, strained, pleading. Then Marcus's voice. Old, unmoved. Deadly calm. Plans for the explosion. Payments from rival families. A confession woven through casual conversation. Elias told me afterward that his hands shook. Not from fear. But from rage. But the final drawer. The final drawer changed everything. Wrapped in plastic. Preserved. Unbelievably real. My father's severed thumb. The one used for biometric access to his locked accounts. His inheritance vault. His empire. Marcus had stolen more than a life. He had stolen control. And he had done it with surgical cruelty. Elias snapped photos, grabbed the recorder and turned to leave. But footsteps echoed in the hall. Slow. Measured. Predatory. Marcus was arriving. The devil returning to his den. Elias hid behind a steel pillar. The air shook with silence. Marcus's keys jingled. A door clicked open. A leather coat rustled. Elias said the cold sweat down his spine felt like death reaching for him. One wrong breath, one wrong shift, and I would have lost him forever. But a phone rang, distracting Marcus. He turned away, stepped out. The door slammed shut behind him. Elias sprinted into the night, with death only 2 footsteps behind him. When Elias finally came home, his shirt was damp with sweat, his eyes dark with everything he had seen. He collapsed into my arms, breathing hard, holding the recorder like a piece of heaven and hell combined. "Seraphina," he whispered, voice trembling with adrenaline and fury. "We have him." And in that moment, for the first time since my father died, I felt destiny shift in my favor. When death desires you, it sends familiar footsteps. The first attempt came quietly, like all evil things do. I stepped onto the balcony that morning, hoping the sunrise would silence the storm inside me. The mansion was still. The world was soft with waking light. Then the railing snapped. Not cracked. Not bent. Snapped. The metal had been sawed through, deliberately, clean, precise. The kind of work a professional does when he wants gravity to finish the kill. I would have fallen 3 stories onto marble stone if Elias hadn't grabbed my wrist from behind, pulling me against his chest so fast. I felt his heartbeat slam into mine. His voice was low, controlled, dead serious. "Seraphina, someone wants you gone." But I already knew who. Marcus, the man with my blood, but none of my humanity. It happened at dinner. The maid served wine, red, rich, a smooth scent with a metallic aftertaste that did not belong. Elias sniffed the glass before I touched it. His jaw tightened. "Don't drink this." He poured a few drops onto silver. The metal blackened instantly. Poison meant for me. Poison chosen by a man who knew exactly how I preferred my wine. Elias's eyes darkened, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. Rage. He swept the glasses off the table, so violently the shards flew like fallen stars. "Sim, your uncle won't stop until you're in the ground." I never saw him look so murderous. I thought nightmares belonged to sleep, but that night I learned they also walk. A shadow stood over my bed, blade raised, breath steady. I woke because the air felt wrong, too cold, too sharp. Before I could scream, Elias burst through the door, tackling the intruder with a force I didn't know lived inside a man like him. The fight was brutal. Not elegant, not movie perfect, just raw survival. Bodies slamming into furniture, grunts sharp in the dark, steel clashing against bone. The intruder fled through the window, leaving blood behind. My hands trembled. My breaths came in shards. And Elias held me like he was holding on to life itself. "I won't let him touch you. Not while I breathe." Something in his voice broke me wide open. The next morning, Elias hired private guards, silent men with sharp eyes, and hands that never wandered near their pockets. Without purpose, he stationed 2 outside our bedroom door, 2 in the hall, 1 in a car watching the street. He didn't sleep. He sat awake beside me, back against the wall, gun on his thigh, like a sentinel carved from midnight. The truth unraveled because of a simple detail. His aim. That night during the intruder's escape, Elias threw a blade, a small one he'd hidden in his sleeve, and hit the man's shoulder. From across the room, in the dark. A normal accountant doesn't throw knives like that. A normal accountant doesn't dodge punches with military precision. A normal accountant doesn't know how to detect poison by scent or predict sabotage from the weight shift of a balcony rail. So I asked him, stiffly, fearfully, honestly, "Elias, who are you?" He didn't lie. He didn't deflect. He didn't hide. He looked me straight in the soul and answered, "The man your father trusted, when he trusted no one else." My breath froze. My heart forgot its rhythm. Elias continued, voice low and steady. "I infiltrated the banking network for him. I protected his accounts. Protected you. I was never meant to marry you, but he knew someday you would need someone who could kill. For your safety." I stared at him, the quiet man with shy eyes and deadly hands, and for the first time, I realized my father didn't leave me a husband. He left me a guardian, a weapon wrapped in gentleness. And I wasn't afraid. I felt safe. Safer than I had ever been. Some flames don't burn the skin. They burn the walls we built around our hearts. There are nights you remember because they change the map of your soul. This was mine. The house was quiet. Guards stationed like loyal phantoms outside the door. Danger lingering in every shadow. And yet the room felt warm. Because Elias was inside it. He had just tended to the latest bruise on my arm. A reminder of how close death had come. His fingers were gentle, But beneath that gentleness was a tension I could feel like a heartbeat against my skin. Not fear, not anger, something deeper, something he had buried for months, something I had buried too. I looked at him, really looked, the man who guarded me through every hour of the night, who stood between me and death, as though he were made of iron, and yet whose voice softened only when it carried my name. His hands were still holding my wrist. He didn't let go. Not this time. Our eyes locked, and for once, there were no lies between us. Just truth, just longing, just the quiet ache of two people who had been circling the same flame. I whispered, barely audible, "Elias, why are you doing this for me?" His answer wasn't a sentence. It was a confession disguised as breath. "Because losing you would destroy me." The words hit me harder than any slap Evelyn ever gave. He hesitated, as if touching me might break me, but I stepped closer, closing the inch between us that had felt like a mile for months. His forehead leaned into mine. Our breaths mingled. The world disappeared. Then he kissed me. Not fiercely, not hungrily, fully, tenderly, like he had waited a lifetime and wanted to memorize my lips. With reverence, not rush. I melted into him. All my wounds, all my fears, all the ghosts of my past, quieting beneath his touch. Because for the first time in my life, someone wasn't taking from me. He was giving. We didn't rush. We didn't need to. We simply let ourselves exist. In each other's arms. Without guilt. Without fear. Without pretending. He held my face like it was something precious. I held his heart like it was something fragile. His touch wasn't possession. It was devotion. And mine wasn't obedience. It was choice. For the first time, I chose someone with my whole soul. We whispered secrets in the dim glow of the room. Things we had never spoken aloud. His childhood. My loneliness. His fears. My scars. We kissed again. Deeper, slower, warmer. Letting our emotions speak the words we were too human to form. And when we finally lay together, it wasn't passion that consumed us. It was belonging. Two broken people. Fitting perfectly. In the quiet space. Between heartbreak and healing. When morning came, I woke with his arms wrapped around me. His breath soft against my neck. His heartbeat steady beneath my palm. I had never felt safer. Or chosen. Or seen. He whispered into my hair. "You're not alone anymore." And for the first time in my entire life, not even as a child in Richard's arms, I believed it. Elias wasn't my contract husband anymore. He was my home. My shield. My first fire. And the first man to love me. Not as a duty, but as destiny. When truth is revealed, even kings and criminals pause to listen. The falling in love felt like light. The days that followed felt like thunder. Elias moved through the mansion with purpose. Calculating, focused, deadly calm. A man with a mission he would finish. Even if it cost him the breath in his lungs. For weeks we had been hunted. For months lied to. For years my Uncle Marcus had played the world. Like a violin tuned to murder. But now the world was about to hear the right melody. The one Elias composed out of truth, evidence, and justice sharpened into a spear. The trap was not local. It was global. Because the names involved were too powerful. Too internationally protected. Too deeply buried in shadows. To be taken down by mere accusation. We needed giants. And Elias knew exactly whom to call. It happened in a private underground chamber. Beneath the estate of Isabella's husband. A Mafia lord feared on 3 continents. The room was carved in cold marble. Lit by a single chandelier dripping crystals. That seemed to watch the meeting. With quiet hunger. At the long table sat Dante Marino, the Mafia lord. Prince Aurelius Voss, heir to the Vossian crown. Isabella, calm and composed beside her husband. Elias at my side. And me, the daughter of the man whose death began this firestorm. 2 worlds that would never mix in daylight. Sat together in the underworld. Because of a single name. Marcus Lancaster. My uncle. My father's executioner. The architect of our suffering. Elias placed a small device on the table. A recorder. Cold metal. Deadly history. Then he pressed play. My father's voice filled the room. Pleading for his life. Realizing too late. That betrayal wore his brother's face. Dante's jaw tightened. Aurelius's eyes narrowed. But Elias wasn't done. He placed the second object on the table. A photograph of the mask Marcus wore. During his killings. Then the final horror. A sealed photograph of my father's severed thumb. A hush swallowed the room. The kind that precedes storms. And reshapes kingdoms. Elias's voice cut through the silence. Marcus Lancaster isn't just a traitor. He's a ghost wearing a dozen faces. A hired executioner for multiple syndicates. Your enemies. Your rivals. Your shadows. Dante's fingers curled like he wanted to break the table. Aurelius exchanged a single weighted look with him. Enemies became allies in an instant. Tall silent figure, whose calm held the weight of 1,000 years. Marcus infiltrated our royal banks. We've traced missing funds, coded accounts, and assassinations back to him. He turned his gaze to me, not with resentment, but with respect. Your father knew. He placed his trust in Elias, because he saw the storm coming. I felt my heart break in a new way, a way that healed at the same time, as I finally realized, my father hadn't left me weak. He had left me protected. By Elias. By truth. By destiny. Dante spoke next, his voice low and lethal. Marcus killed a man I respected. He broke a blood oath, and he dared to manipulate the inheritance of my wife's sister. His eyes, cold as winter, turned to Elias. Tell us the plan. We'll follow it. For a mafia lord to say those words? That was no small thing. That was the world shaking. Elias pulled out a folder. Thick, organized, terrifying in its precision. Maps. Financial trails. Communication logs. Assassination orders signed under coded aliases. A list of allies Marcus believed loyal, but who were already being watched. Elias tapped the final page. Marcus believes he controls every side. He doesn't. We do. He looked at me then, as if my strength anchored the room. Seraphina holds the final key. Her thumbprint unlocks your father's true vault. And in that vault is the power to bring Marcus's empire crashing down. Aurelius nodded slowly. Dante exhaled. Isabella placed her hand over her heart. The trap wasn't just set. It was inevitable. The Mafia. The royal family. Elias. Me. Bound together. By justice. Guile. And the determination. To end the reign of a man who thought himself untouchable. In that room, I felt my father's presence. Not as a ghost, but as destiny fulfilled. Elias took my hand under the table, his thumb brushing mine, with a silent promise. We'll finish what he started. And I whispered back. Together. The global trap was set. Now all that remained was to spring it. Some doors open with keys. Others open with blood. My father was a complicated man. Silent in love. Loud in protection. And dangerously brilliant in secrecy. He left the world abruptly. Violently. Unfairly. But what he left behind was not only grief. It was power. The kind of power that could resurrect a family. Or destroy an empire. And somehow, he placed that power in my hands. Elias took me to my father's old study. A place sealed since the funeral. Dust coated the bookshelves. His scent lingered in the leather armchair. The air itself felt haunted. Elias pressed a hidden latch under the desk. A low rumble echoed. The bookshelf slid open, revealing a staircase, descending into darkness. My breath caught. He built this for you, Elias whispered. But how? Why? How long had he known that his life would be cut short? We walked down together, and at the end of the staircase stood the vault door. Unbreakable, designed with a single access method. My fingerprint. Not DNA, not codes, not passwords. Me. Only me. My fate sealed in metal. The scanner glowed blue. When I pressed my finger against it, for a second nothing happened. Then, a mechanical hum. A click. A shift. The entire door rotated open, like a giant turning in its sleep. Inside was not just a room. It was a world. Stacks of bearer bonds. Folders labeled with global corporations. A hidden ledger containing offshore accounts. Shares in companies I had only heard whispered about. Blueprints of investments decades ahead of their time. And in the center, a glass table, with a single sealed envelope. My name written in my father's handwriting. The moment my fingers touched it, my knees almost gave way. Elias stood beside me as I opened it. The letter was short. Painfully short. My Seraphina, if you're reading this, it means the danger I foresaw has reached you. This inheritance is your shield. Your proof. Your future. Do not trust blood. Trust character. Trust love. Trust the man who finds this room with you. He will protect you the way I no longer can. Your father. Tears blurred the ink, because in that moment, I realized, he anticipated everything. The betrayal. His death. Marcus's rise. Even Elias. He knew we would find each other. He believed in us. Before we even met. Elias guided me through the vault's contents. My father had built a silent empire. Investments woven across nations. Protected by anonymity. Worth billions. And all of it, transferred to me, the instant my fingerprint touched the vault door. Elias looked at me, with a mixture of awe and fear. Seraphina, you are the family's future now. You decide who rises, and who falls. It was overwhelming, terrifying, empowering. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the girl constantly sacrificed for peace, or silence, or inheritance politics. I was the inheritance. I was the key. When we walked back upstairs, I wasn't the same woman who had entered. Seraphina, Lancaster, the adopted daughter, gone. Lancaster, sole heir to a global fortune, and the only person who could bring down Marcus, born. Elias took my hand gently. Your father made you the center of the storm, he said, but he also made you the only one strong enough to end it. And for the first time, I believed him. The night smelled of rust, gasoline, and death. When Elias told me the Mafia lord and the royal family had joined forces to corner Marcus, the uncle who murdered my father, I thought justice would finally come clean and easy. I was wrong. Nothing about my life had ever been clean. Nothing about Marcus was ever easy. Fog crawled across the ground like a living thing. Crates stacked like mausoleums towered over us. Ships moaned against their anchors. The combined forces were supposed to surround Marcus silently. But Marcus had been waiting. The first explosion hit the east docks. Flames roared into the sky. Men scattered. Bullets screamed. It wasn't an ambush. It was a massacre in the making. Elias grabbed my arm, dragging me behind a steel container. Stay down. Stay hidden. But I could hear orders shouted in the dark. Men crying out. Gunfire splitting the air. And somewhere in that chaos, Isabella's Mafia husband Lorenzo De Luca was fighting for all of us. Marcus emerged from the smoke, like a demon carved from the fire. Black tactical gear. His signature mask. Eyes empty. Laughter rotten. He spotted Elias immediately. You again. The accountant who refuses to die. Elias stepped forward. No fear. No hesitation. No mask to hide behind. Just raw determination. Tonight you answer for Richard. Marcus fired first. Elias dove behind a crate. Sparks flew as bullets chewed metal. They moved like shadows. Two predators. Two pasts crashing into each other. For months Elias had been protecting me. Tonight he was fighting for something else. My father. And us. I heard someone scream Isabella's name. Then I saw it. Lorenzo sprinting across the chaos. Toward her hiding spot. Pushing her down just as Marcus fired. The bullet hit him in the chest. Then another. And another. Lorenzo collapsed into Isabella's arms. Her scream cut through the night. Like the world itself was splitting open. He looked up at her. Eyes soft despite the blood on his lips. I got to love you. That was enough. Then he was gone. The Mafia soldiers roared with a grief that sounded like vengeance. Isabella shattered beside her husband. And Marcus smiled. A smile that made my bones freeze. Something broke inside Elias. Something primal. He charged Marcus. No gun. No strategy. Just fury. Their bodies crashed into a steel pillar. Fists flew. Bones cracked. Every hit echoed with years of betrayal. Marcus stabbed at Elias. Elias twisted the knife away. Marcus slammed him into a crate. Elias headbutted him so hard the mask cracked. For the first time, Marcus looked afraid. Because Elias stopped fighting like a soldier. He fought like a man protecting the woman he loved. And the memory of the father she lost. The royal soldiers surrounded Marcus. Guns raised. The Mafia lord walked up. Face broken with fury over Lorenzo's death. Let me kill him, he demanded. Elias wiped the blood from his mouth. No, Seraphina deserves the truth. He lives. Marcus lunged. A final desperate attempt. Elias struck him once, disarming him, pinning him to the ground. With brutal precision. Marcus snarled beneath him, bleeding, beaten, but finally powerless. You can't stop what comes next, he hissed. Elias tightened the restraints around his wrists. I already did. And with that, the man who destroyed my childhood and murdered my father was dragged away alive to face the storm he created. When Elias finally reached me, he pulled me into his arms, like he had been drowning without me. His voice shook when he whispered, It's over, Seraphina. But as I looked around, at Isabella screaming over Lorenzo's body, at the burning docks, at the soldiers carrying Marcus into custody, I realized something. Tonight was not the end. It was only the beginning of truths sharp enough to cut. Not all queens inherit thrones. Some crawl through fire to build their own. When the smoke cleared from the docks, and Marcus, the monster who hunted me, was finally chained, I thought my story had reached its loudest chapter. But destiny had one more truth to reveal. I was not meant to be the frightened girl in a billionaire's shadow. I was meant to rise from it. The meeting room felt colder than the morgue. Royal elders sat on one side, Mafia leaders on another. My father's remaining board members filled the center. Elias stood behind me, injured, bruised, but unwavering. They read out the final encrypted document Richard left behind. The part even Evelyn never knew. In the event of my death, the Lancaster Empire shall be entrusted, solely and irrevocably, to Seraphina Lancaster. Gasps cracked the room open. Evelyn nearly collapsed. Aidan cursed under his breath. Isabella cried silently. Me. My world stilled. I hadn't just been his daughter. I had been his chosen heir. Not out of pity, not out of guilt, but out of trust, out of love. Evelyn rose to her feet with trembling fury. She is adopted. She is nothing. The royal prince slammed his hand on the table. She is the only one whose fingerprint unlocks the fortune. Your husband died protecting. The Mafia lord added quietly. Richard chose wisely. His bloodline or not, she is the only one fit to lead. For the first time in her life, Evelyn had no weapon left to throw. Not even her pride. When the meeting adjourned, I found Aidan and Isabella waiting by the marble staircase. Aidan couldn't look me in the eye. Maybe he finally felt the weight of all he had done. Isabella stepped forward first. Sarah, I'm sorry. For everything. Her voice was cracked hollow. The cry of a widow who lost her heart at the docks. Aidan spoke next, barely above a whisper. You're the only one Dad loved enough to trust. Once, their words would have felt like victory. Now they felt like scars healing. Slowly. Painfully. Honestly. That night, I stood in the grand hallway. The same one where Evelyn once slapped me. Where Aidan tried to break me. Where I cried alone as a child. Elias stepped beside me. You don't owe them anything. I looked at him. The man who had fought death for me. Bled for me. Loved me without asking for anything in return. I know, I whispered. But I owe myself the future my father wanted. And that future does not involve becoming what they were to me. Forgiving doesn't erase the past, but it rewrites the future. So I did something no one expected. I offered them a place beside me. Not as tormentors. Not as rivals. But as family. Wounded, flawed, rebuilding family. I took my seat at the head of the Lancaster table the next morning. My father's chair. My empire. My destiny. With trembling hands but a steady heart, I declared, we rise together. We repair together. We lead together. The twins nodded. Even Evelyn lowered her head. For the first time in my life, they depended on me. Not because I was weak, but because I had survived everything. They used to destroy me. And in choosing not to abandon them, I became something greater than an heir. I became the backbone of a dynasty. My father built with love and foresight. That night, Elias pulled me close in our room. You changed everything today, he murmured. No, I whispered, leaning into him. I finally became who I was meant to be. He smiled, soft, proud, full of the future we'd earned. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not adopted. Not unwanted. Not surviving. Leading. But chosen. Just as Richard intended. Some empires are carved from steel and blood. Ours was forged from wounds, forgiveness, and love too stubborn to die. The day I officially became the head of the Lancaster Empire, the world bowed, watched, whispered. But none of it mattered, because when I looked to my right, Elias was there, the man who once walked into my life as a shy accountant, and ended up rewriting my entire universe. Our story didn't begin with fireworks. It began with a contract neither of us wanted, and a shared loneliness we didn't understand. Now it was ending with something far stronger. A kingdom we built together. No lawyers. No signatures. No threats. No mother forcing destinies into the wrong hands. Just us. One evening, Elias took my hand on the balcony, overlooking the city we now shaped. Sarah, he whispered, his voice trembling the way it did the night he almost died in my arms. Our marriage began in chains, but I wanted to continue in choice. My heart held its breath. Then choose me, I whispered back. Not because you must, but because you want to. He pressed his forehead to mine. Soft, reverent. I choose you, he said. Every version of you. Every scar, every shadow, every sunrise. And when he kissed me, slow, deep, sure, I knew our contract marriage had been nothing but fate's disguise. For the greatest love of my life. Evelyn apologized. It was awkward, strained, incomplete. But it was real. Aidan found help. finally confronting the darkness he inherited from her. Not from Richard. Isabella, widowed and raw with grief, found a new purpose rebuilding the Mafia house. In Lorenzo's honor. Me. I made a promise to myself at 16, that if I ever escaped my pain, I would never recreate it. So I didn't abandon them. Not because they deserved it, but because I did. Forgiving them healed a part of me. Nothing else ever could. The world still believed he was an accountant. But I now knew the truth. Elias Thorne was a ghost of the global underworld. A silent observer. Protector. A deadly force wrapped in gentle quiet. Now together our power wasn't built on violence, but on intelligence, alliance and legacy. We weren't feared. We were respected. That was the empire my father wanted. At a private ceremony, just the twins, Evelyn and a few trusted allies, I placed my hand on Richard's last ledger. Elias placed his hand over mine, and together we swore, this empire will stand on family, not fear, on justice, not blood, on love, not legacy alone. For the first time, I felt the universe settle around me, like a crown I had earned, not inherited. Years later, when people speak of the Lancaster dynasty, they do not speak of Marcus. They do not speak of betrayal or death. They speak of a girl who rose from rejection, a man who rose from shadows, a love that rose from nothing, and built a new future. They speak of us, Elias and Seraphina, two strangers forced into a contract, who built a kingdom of their own choosing. If pain was the fire, love was the ash we rebuilt ourselves from. If the past tried to break us, the future bowed to us. And if destiny tried to write our story, we rewrote the ending. Together. This is my legacy. This is our kingdom. This is the rise of Seraphina Lancaster.